Hi, and welcome to Your Truth Explored, the podcast where we unpack your truths to bring clarity, understanding, and insight into what lies ahead. My name is Rodney. Today we have the privilege of spending some time with Dr. Tim Baker, who is a leadership psychologist, author, sought-after facilitator, and keynote speaker who works with organizations to build trust, accountability, and sustainable performance with leaders. With a doctorate in psychology and decades of experience coaching executives, leaders, and teams, Tim is known for blending rigorous evidence-based insight with practical human-centered application. His work focuses on helping leaders create momentum through clarity, meaningful conversations, and everyday leadership behaviors that drive engagement and results. Tim is the author of 19 books and has worked in 14 countries and across 21 industries. He is recognized for his ability to translate complex psychology into simple, accountable leadership practice that sticks. Welcome. Today I'm pretty excited to introduce Dr. Tim from Winners at Work. Doctor, and what sort of drew you to this work?
Yeah, thanks, Rodney. There's a lot of reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing, but I started out as a school teacher many years ago, and I didn't last very long. I decided to go into the corporate world and as a manager, and I worked my way up to senior executive positions. And one of those positions was as a conference manager. And so I was managing conferences, so I was getting speakers to come in and I'm paying them as well. And I'm looking at what I'm paying them. And I, of course, sat in the room on a lot of occasions and thought to myself, you know what? I could be doing this with my teaching background, my management background. And that's precisely what I did. And that's how I kind of got into the business I did. So I do platform speaking. I do, run workshops. I executive coach as well. And I've been doing that now, I dare I say, for 30 years. I've had an opportunity to work in 14 countries and across 21 industries, and I've written 19 books.
And that was one of the striking things, was the sort of breadth of your work. If you had to choose a nugget out there that said, what is most organizations' misunderstanding about leadership? Is there a nugget that you draw on?
I think it's all about influence. I think that a lot of people think it's about entitlement and it's the authority because I've got a title of leader. People will just simply follow me. Well, that's not necessarily the case, as we all know. And so they forget that to work on themselves, and they forget that actually they're in the business of influencing and shaping other people. And to me, good leaders understand that implicitly. And I'm sure you've seen that. And of course, poor leaders have that entitlement that, I've worked my way up the ladder. Why should I bother to make the effort to coach and assist my team members? I didn't need it. I'm here. I'm where I am because of who I am.
And so would you say that bridge then for the leader is communication?
Yes, but communication with an asterisk. I don't think it's about communication as in I'm a good speaker or I'm fluent. Yes, all those things can help, absolutely. But communication in terms of being authentic, that is being yourself. And I find that leaders who are true to themselves and authentic, and surprisingly a lot aren't, those are the ones that are highly effective communicators because when they say what they say, even though it mightn't be as articulate as a professional communicator, people know that where they're coming from is real. And so, because at the end of the day, everyone knows that that's a person that's leading me, not a leader that's leading me. At the end of the day, it's the individual that makes the difference.
So is communication maybe the wrong word and conversation a better word?
Yeah, look, I'm a huge, this is my life's work is about how do we connect better with our individual team members and collective as well.
Yeah.
And to me, conversation is the most underrated leadership skill that's out there. And when I say conversation, if you think about it, there are three types of conversations that people have in the workplace. One, and if you think about a spectrum, at one end of the spectrum, you've got idle chit chat. How was your weekend? You know, how did the wedding go? That kind of thing that happens. And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't do that. Of course we should. It's the social lubricant. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have project-based conversations, which is all about how do we get the job out the door? How do we get the service done? Of course, no one's suggesting that those things shouldn't happen, but that's about all that does happen. And what I'm suggesting is that there's something in the middle called developmental conversations. And this is the ability to connect with people and to help them grow and develop in their role. That's the part that's missing. And all good leaders understand that implicitly, and they have their regular catch-ups and
Mm.
sit down, not check-ins, because it sounds like I'm checking in, but catch-ups. They
Yeah.
sit down, it's 20 minutes maybe once a month, and they have a conversation which is about the individual. It's about the other person. And that's my
So,
last word.
yes. And so, what would you say most leaders are, what conversation are they avoiding?
Well, I think a lot of leaders don't feel comfortable because they have been promoted from a technical capability. So they might be a great accountant or an engineer or whatever, and
Mm.
all of a sudden they're a leader. So, of course, they have no idea about how to do these things. They kind of, in the one hand, have heard that they should be doing it, but they don't really know how to do it. So there's a lot of issues around the fear of, am I doing this right? Am I exposing myself too much? So I think there are two things that get in the way. How do I do it? And am I am I able to do it? Do I feel comfortable being myself in that? And I'm not talking about a personal relationship here, as you'd be aware. It's a working relationship nonetheless,
Yeah.
but just being a little bit more open. And I think a lot of leaders find that very difficult. And of course, the third reason, and it's probably with these entitled leaders, is why should I need to do this? I've got here through hard yards. So
Yeah.
why do I need to go through this process with my team members? So I think they're the real reasons why people don't.
A couple of the episodes that preceded our chat today was this emotional boundaries and consistency in our behavior, that awareness piece of what my choices are and my consistency within those choices. Is there a link between that internal audit, for use of a term, and these inherent skill sets that these leaders need, especially those that have been promoted, like you say, the accountant that got there and is now leading?
Yeah, look, I think my advice to anybody that's going into a leadership role is I would say to them, work as hard on yourself as you did on your profession.
Hmm.
And if you do that, you'll be unstoppable. So there is work to be done to become a leader. It's quite separate from the technical capabilities that you've got.
Yes.
So it's a lot of, I think the missing link in leadership too is about self-leadership. That is the ability to grow and develop in the role. And
Yeah.
self-leadership is about how I can improve my resilience, how I can have a growth mindset, how I can deal with conflict, how I can show up at work with a positive frame, even when things around me are crumbling. All of these are attributes that people need to learn to be a great leader, because the truth of the matter is that leaders are watched. They're observed more than they
Yes.
actually think. So you walk down the corridor and you're hunched over and you've got a frown on your face because you're going to a meeting and you've got to give a presentation. Well, the people walking past you notice that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you say something, or someone says hello to you in the morning and you don't say anything back. Well, people notice that. And so what happens is the higher up you go in a leadership role, the more these small incidents that sometimes people aren't aware of become magnified.
Yeah.
So being self-aware is absolutely critical. So, that it's the Socrates issue of know thyself.
Yeah. That's
Um,
right.
is really, really important. So that's another attribute that's important.
Even in the coaching space, as you'll be aware, and in the counseling and psychology space, the more I work on myself, the more efficient I can be with the client on the other side of the table. Sounds to me
Yeah,
like that's what we're
100%.
talking about, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of leaders don't self-reflect enough. And in fact, one of my clients is a CEO of a large company of 6,000 people, and he told me an interesting story that at 10 o'clock every day, this is every day at work, he closes his door, he asks his PA to organise him a coffee. And he closed his door, and I said to him, well, what do you do? He said, I go through my diary or calendar, and what I do is I look for all the meetings that are coming up. I think about the messages that I'm trying to get through in those meetings. I look back at what I did the day before and think about how I could have done things better. And I thought to myself, wow, Rodney, if somebody who's leading 6,000 people
Yes.
can afford to close their door every day at 10 o'clock, what's to stop you and I doing a little bit of self-reflection? So I found that really interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, tell me about the conversation framework overview.
Coming back to the original point we talked about, where leaders should have these regular catch-ups with their team members, one of the reasons most people will say that's a great idea, but what happens is it descends to project-based conversations. While you're here, let's talk about that last report.
Yeah.
Or it ends up being idle chit-chat. So what I thought is I need to put a framework in place to help people to have these regular catch-ups with their team members. So I'll run through it very briefly with you. Conversation one is a climate review conversation. Has nothing to do with the weather, but everything to do with how people are feeling at work, their job satisfaction, and so on. So, companies spend thousands, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on these reviews every year, these sort of surveys, engagement surveys online. I just think, well, why don't we just sit down and talk to people about it? So the first question there is on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 high, 1 low, how would you rate your current job satisfaction? Now, I don't mind what the person says, but if they say a 7, I'll say why. And then that builds up an interesting answer, and it gives people a chance to talk about what's important to them at work. So that's conversation one, very simple. Conversation two is strengths and talents. Instead of going straight for the jugular and talking about what people are not good at, why don't we actually talk to people about what they are good at? That's a better start, in my view. But if you said to somebody, what's your strength, or what are you good at work? Well, of course, they're going to sit there and squirm in their chair and all the rest of it. But if you said to somebody, what's the one thing that you enjoy most about the work that you do here? They'll have an answer for that. And they might say, I really enjoy client interaction. You say, and then you say, well, why is that? Why do you enjoy that? And so what that conversation could lead to is the opportunity to get that person to do more of what they're actually naturally talented at doing.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing. And that's what we call job crafting, is to change their job to match their skill set. Conversation three is opportunities for growth. And again, it's not for the leader to sit there and say, tell me what your area of growth is. This is what I think your area of growth is. You ask them what they think their areas of growth is, and you give them a chance to think about that. And then it's about how can I support you in that in the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
So that's so far we've talked about what people are good at, what people aren't good at, and how they feel about work. Conversation four is really about learning and development and bringing all of that together into some sort of a plan. And again, human resources spend inordinate amounts of time doing what we call these training needs analyses. And instead of doing that, why don't we just get leaders to talk to their team members and try and shape an approach? And it's not necessarily about sending people off to courses. It could be buddying them up with someone. It could be explaining something a little bit more clearly. And then the last conversation is innovation and continuous improvement. Now, conversation four is about themselves. Conversation five is about how we can improve the workplace. And again, the ideas don't have to be Nobel Peace Prize ideas. It could be as simple as we need a notice board in the warehouse, or we need a briefing about what happens at executive leadership team meetings. It could be literally that simple, but that important. So we get people to actually share those ideas in conversations. Now, if we had 5 conversations around that, it's inevitable that some of them are not going to be practical. They'll be expensive. They're not worth it. But it's also equally inevitable there'll be one or two good ideas that we can implement.
Yeah.
So the pressure's then on the manager to make those things happen. And if it passes the test, which is how will this be received? What's the cost of implementation? And why and what difference will it make? Now,
Yeah.
if we can tick those three boxes, then it's obviously a good idea. And all organisations have got innovation and continuous improvement in their values list. But the reason they're not getting the ideas coming back is because they're not asking for them in one-on-one environments.
Yeah.
So that's the 5 conversations framework. It works brilliantly.
And so
20
if
minutes.
I'm listening and I'm going, phew, so I'd like my hands on that framework. Where do I get that? How do I get my hands on that?
Well, I mean, if you just go onto YouTube or actually have a look at, even in LinkedIn, I've made many references to it. So there's plenty of videos out there on it, and
Okay.
and of course I've written several books about it as well.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
plenty of opportunity and scope for people to consider that. But at the end of the day, I'm filling a gap because the gap is that people don't know. They understand they should be sitting down with people, but they're not quite sure what to talk about. So what I'm doing is at least giving them a train track to run on.
Yeah.
And
No,
uh,
that's
and
brilliant.
the and we when I implement this in workplaces, I measure it. So we do a survey up front, and the survey up front is to determine where the organization's at. 50 statements online takes 10 minutes to do. And then after 5 conversations, we do it again. And I can tell you, Rodney, inevitably, those things double. Trust doubles, engagement doubles. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And in fact, what it does is it creates more conversations, impromptu conversations, because a lot of people feel reluctant to go to their manager because they don't want to upset them, or they think
Yeah.
they don't. There's not the trust there. So this opens up a window for more opportunities for communication that wouldn't normally be there, and that's one of the great byproducts of it. And of
Yeah.
course, if you just think about some of the clients you work with, some of the organizations, imagine if every single leader, whether they were leading hand and CEO, everything in between, was having 10, that is two lots of the 5 conversations, 10, 20-minute conversations on people, on their direct reports development every year. Can you imagine the difference that would make across the organization
Yeah.
culturally?
Yeah.
It's massive.
Yeah.
So what I'm talking to you about is common sense, but as you know, it's not always common
Yes.
practice, but
That's
it
right.
makes a
Application
massive
is key.
difference.
Now, one of the hurdles that I think of immediately as you explain that, and I like the analogy of the train track because it gives you the guideline. When I talk to a lot of my clients, they're already answering the question before the person having the conversation has even finished delivering their thoughts. So,
Yeah.
what is the key? Is there a key to get somebody to be brave enough to go, just listen?
Listening is the common cold of leadership. And, the interesting thing is, look, I'll give you a little example to illustrate what the point you're making and then answer it a bit more directly. I did a 360-degree feedback on a leader, and it got to the question. It's a simple statement: I'm a good listener. He said, yes, I am. His boss said, yes, you are. And he had 10 direct reports, and 8 of those said, no, you're not. And I said, what's going on here? And he said, this is very frustrating. He said, I can't seem to get anybody to listen to me. Have you got any advice? I said, yeah, I do. Listen to them. That's a good start.
That's right.
Clearly, they don't think you're listening to them, whether you are or you're not. This is the feedback you're receiving.
Yeah.
So it's just taking a deep breath. I think there's nothing magic about it. And don't interrupt people. Listen, reflect, ask more questions. Why, what, when, who, where, how, and which? Why'd you say that? What do you mean?
Yeah.
Who was involved? And allow the person to elaborate. and allow the person to give their full account of what's going on. It's not easy, and I'll tell you why it's not easy. Our brain processes information at something incredible like 400 to 500 words a minute. And yet we speak, depending on where we are and what state we are in Australia, or, we speak at around 280 words a minute. So there's a deficit. And while I'm talking to you, someone might be thinking, well, I wonder what I'll have for lunch, or I wonder when I need to get that report to that client. So there is a deficit. So it's not a simple thing to listen.
Yeah.
So you've actually got to train yourself. And I often find one of the best ways to do this is to say to people, I am going to give this person 100% undivided attention, and I'm going to listen to what they say. So for your listeners and viewers, try this today. You will be amazed if you do this, the difference you'll get, not from yourself, but from the other person. It's amazing. All of a sudden, you'll see a different person in front of you, even if it's online. They will be different because they know that whether you're listening to them or not. And if you look at there's a high correlation between people's influence, like I said with the example about the person I coached, and their capacity to listen. So if you're perceived as a good listener, you will have enormous influence.
So, working with all this data for such a long time, all this aha moments you've had with clients where they've discovered the value of these conversation points and how communication really enhances their influence. Do you feel it's shaped you in any way?
Well, it shaped me a number of ways. That's a great question. It shaped me a number of ways. It shaped me to realize that this is more difficult than it might sound. I mean, people are listening to this and thinking that's common sense. It's often more difficult because the last 10 things that person said to you was in your mind rubbish. So why wouldn't the 11th thing be rubbish? So why should I bother to listen to number 11 when in fact the last 10 things I didn't think were added much value to anything? So it's the judgment and the perceptions that we have, and trying to suppress those things is often very difficult because we have prior information that gets in the way. But one of the things I have learned about all of this is that there are very few people who are really good listeners, but when I find them, they have unbelievable presence. The other side of it, I'd say, is, people talk about charisma, and there's a lot of misleading stuff about that. But at the end of the day, all charisma is being in the moment. So people who are absolutely there in the moment, and of course, listening is in the moment, right?
Yeah.
So people who have charisma are there in the moment. They're giving the person 100% undivided attention. So ironically, what happens is our image of them is elevated because of who they are and what they're doing. So very charismatic people, show me a charismatic person anywhere, and sure, they're probably great speakers, they might be good looking and all the rest of it, but the number one issue is that they are there in the present moment. Being in the moment is key, and that's
Yeah.
something I find leaders have trouble with a lot.
Now, Tim, if there is a leader that's watching today and they go, geez, I'd like to know more, or maybe I'd like to employ your services, how do they find you?
Well, you can go to my website, www.winnersatwork.com, or you can go to LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's where we connected, and
Yeah.
I do a lot of work there. I think they're the two best places. Or if you go to Amazon, you just type in Dr. Tim Baker, and you should get a series of books that pop out at you. So, yeah, that'd be the places I'd look, Rodney.
Well, I really thank you for your time today, and so I think my key that I'll be taking away today is the importance of that integrity behind the conversation. So when I'm working on my communication skills, to lean more heavily on the listening portion of that communication skill, because I think sometimes we can, or maybe I can, practice on the delivery more than the listening. So that will be my takeaway. So thank you for that.
No, it's a pleasure. It's a good lesson for all of us, Rodney, for sure.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Your Truth Explored. If today's episode resonated with you, please take a moment to follow the podcast and share it with someone who might benefit from the conversation. Your support helps these messages reach the people who need them most. If you'd like to explore your own truths more deeply, you're welcome to connect with me at yourtruthservices.com.au about coaching or counseling bookings. Also available on that website is our other resources such as music, books, and videos. Until next time, take care and stay connected to your truth.